Welcome into The Voice Behind the Voice. I'm Sean Aronson, the TV and radio broadcaster for the St. Paul Saints, an independent minor league baseball team in the Twin Cities. You notice at the beginning there I didn't say episode number, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. There is an episode this week, but it's a re-air of one that we've already done for a specific reason, but we'll get to that in a moment. I'm recording this on a Thursday. Again, usually record these on a Monday, but we're about to head out on a road trip, a 7-game trip that will take us to Gary, Indiana, and Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So it hasn't been that long ago since I recorded the last Open. I think we've only played 2 games since then. Went 1-1 in those 2 games. So overall, I think we're 16-8 now on the year, all alone in first place. So not much of a change since the last time we talked. It was funny, I was down at Target Field the other day recording an episode that will be played in a few weeks here, and it's amazing to me how I run into people that are aware of the podcast, and people are starting to ask why they haven't been on the podcast yet, which I take as an extreme compliment. It is extremely flattering. I'm not going to call the person out. I'm not here to do that because I think it was sort of done tongue-in-cheek, but sort of wanting to be on the podcast as well. But it's nice to hear that because this person is not the first person I've heard that from. I've run into other broadcasters, or if I've done a team and then I go back around to that team and get, let's say, their other broadcaster, sometimes they'll joke that, well, how come you haven't gotten me yet? Why are we just doing it now or whatever? And so it's nice to know that the broadcasting world is aware of this podcast and people want to be on it and they want their stories to be told. And all I can say for anybody that is out there that listens and is a broadcaster in one of the 4 major sports or the NCAA, or if you're a national broadcaster and you listen to this, I will get around to everybody, but I only do these in person. That's it. Like, you have to come through town or I have to be in your area because, as I've said before, I think there is something so much more personable about sitting across from someone, looking them face to face and being able to tell their stories as opposed to doing it over the phone or doing it over some video chat. So I promise I will try to get around to everybody, and I am very, very flattered that people want to appear on this podcast. With that said, let's get to this week's episode. You've got to go back, I think, almost to the first year for the time that this episode aired. And I felt like in the summertime, we've talked about it, it's harder for me to get interviews because either the Twins have to be in town and I have to be able to get whoever they're playing, or we have to go on the road to a city that has a major league team and I have to be able to get, and their team has to be in town for me to be able to get to it. So at some point during the summer, I'm going to re-air, previous podcasts. Now I've got a handful in the can right now, but I felt like it was appropriate since the St. Louis Blues have just won the Stanley Cup as I come to you today, 24 hours ago. They won their first ever Stanley Cup, something that as an LA Kings fan I can relate to because the Kings and the Blues came into existence the same year. They are the second wave of the original 6, if you will. There was the original 6 and then 6 additional teams back in 1967, and the Blues were one of those teams. And just like in 2012, when the Kings had never won it since they began, the Blues had never won it until last night. And so I felt like it was appropriate to re-air the John Kelly podcast, the John Kelly episode. His dad was the legendary Hall of Fame broadcaster for the Blues. And a lot of people, when I ask to name the broadcaster they would always wanted to meet or, got to meet, and John Kelly's dad is always the guy that they bring up, but I felt like it was appropriate. Now, John does TV, and so he did the radio, but did the second period. So his call, I don't believe, is the one that was the Stanley Cup champion call last night. I don't know for a fact. They could have given the microphone to him. I really don't know. But I know he was doing the second period of all the playoff games after the first round of the playoffs to, again, he's been around for a long time, and the Kelly name carries so much weight. So a rebroadcast of this, so you're not going to hear anything about the fact the Blues won the Stanley Cup, but I just felt like it was appropriate to re-air this one. If you have not subscribed to the podcast, you can do so, iTunes, wherever you get your podcast. Be sure to rate it, and then you can follow us on social media, Twitter, at The Voice BTV, Facebook, facebook.com/TheVoiceBTV, and you can always email me, thevoicebtv@gmail.com. All right, let's get to it. It is John Kelly of the now Stanley Cup champion St. Louis Blues. JW, roll the open.
I didn't remember saying anything about Herb Brooks or anything negative about his team. So I walked by the locker room because I didn't want to just walk out of the building and let it go. And he confronted me, but he did it in such a hostile way. And he came up and said, what'd you say about my player? And right away I knew he was irate. And I tried to calm the situation by saying, let's go talk about this. He wouldn't have any of it. And it got worse and he pushed me and there were lots of cameras there.